Good evening. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission for the City of Anchorage. Clerk, will you please call roll?
Ms. Yoshimura? Ms. Dean? Here. Mr. Ferguson?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Strike?
Here.
Ms. Barker?
Here.
Mr. Walker?
Here.
Thank you.
Commissioner Tyler, will you handle the disclosures, please?
Yes, sir. Any disclosures, Mr. Spring?
I have no disclosures to make.
Ms. Dean?
No.
Mr. Chair?
No.
Mr. Walker?
No.
Mr. Strike?
Yes, on consent agenda D1B, resolution 2014-016 for the Ship Creek Framework Plan. I was not present last week at that meeting.
And you have not listened to the tapes?
No.
Madam Secretary, please note that he will not be voting on that matter. And Ms. Barker?
Similarly, on item D1A, I was not present at the meeting at which this was originally considered, so I'll be needing to abstain.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to... Yes, sir.
Oh, I forgot actually, on consent agenda D1A, I'll need to abstain from voting on that.
That gives us 6, so we're still good. Go ahead, Mr. Robinson.
Just handling disclosures for myself, please, sir, on items, case numbers S 12061-1, S 12062-1, and 2014-047. I work for the petitioner in this matter, Cook Inlet Housing Authority, and I will be recusing myself on those cases.
Motion to require him to compel him to vote.
With or without questions?
Ask questions. You're reclusing yourself because you have a material interest in those cases. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. Yeah.
I make a motion to have you participate.
Do I have a second? I do have a second. Ms. Dean, do you care to speak to your motion?
I won't be supporting my motion.
I withdrew my second.
I need a second then, please, Mr. Okay. We're back to the second. I will not be supporting the motion also. I think it's correct in this case that Mr. Robinson not participate, but we have to make the motions in a positive on that. Any other discussion? Please. Can we use our machines or not? Let's use the machines. Please use your machines. That motion failed, so Mr. Robinson, you are reclused from those 3 cases. Mr. Spring, on reordering the agenda, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. As per staff request, I propose reordering the agenda, moving item G6 to G5 and moving G5 to G6. The cases are all related to the same item, the Cook Inlet Housing. And if this motion is supported, G4 would remain first on the agenda. Then the rezoning case, 2014-47, would be ordered next. And then the second subdivision case, S12062-1, would be the third item in the series within that same case.
Any objection to reordering the agenda? Seeing and hearing none, the agenda is reordered. May we have a motion to accept the consent agenda, please? We have a motion. Do we have a second? Does anybody want to pull either of the 2 items on the consent agenda? Seeing and hearing no objection, the consent agenda is approved. the audience, I'd like to explain a little bit about our agenda, a couple points. Cases G1, G2, and G3 basically had to do with the outlet mall cases. They have been postponed indefinitely. We do not know when they will be coming before us, but they will be at some later date, and the date is uncertain at this point. Cases 4, 5, and 6 we will hear. Those will be on a combined staff report, a combined applicant, and a combined public hearing on those 3 cases at one time. Then we will vote individually. Then case 7 tonight is the Municipality of Anchorage Severe Alcohol Dependent Housing and Transitional Use Facility. That will come late, or will come at the end of those other 3. I would guess right now that will be something in the neighborhood of 7:30 to 8 o'clock. I understand that there may be an agenda online with a slightly different order. I do not know why that happened. I apologize for any confusion on it, but that is going to be the order in which we are going to handle. So the outlet cases will not be handled tonight. We'll start with the Cook Inlet housing cases, and then we'll go to the severe alcohol-dependent housing cases. May I have a staff report on the Cook Inlet housing, the combined Cook Inlet housing item, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For ease of explanation, staff believes that the 3 cases involved in this development, S12061 and 2014-047 and S12062, should be presented together. However, action for each case should be taken separately. So with that said, I'll start with S12061. This preliminary plat and site plan is a request to create 1 fragment lot and 1 subdivision lot from 1 fragment lot. The intent of this plat is to subdivide the existing fragment lot into 2 lots. 1 lot will remain as a fragment lot as part of the underlying commercial tract, and the other to be a separate subdivision lot. The property is zoned B3 General Business District. It's located east of Mountain View Drive and just north of the Glen Highway. This plat is being done to facilitate the future development of a high-density multifamily housing development. It will create fragment lot 14A-1 and lot 1 of Village at Glen Square subdivision. Fragment lot 14A-1 is currently an undeveloped commercial fragment lot and will remain part of the Mountain View Development subdivision for future development. The currently adopted fragment lot site plan for the commercial tract shows the fragment lot 14A as vacant. The proposed fragment lot site plan for fragment lot 14A-1 shows the lot also as vacant. At such time that the development is proposed for fragment lot 14A-1, the commercial tract fragment lot site plan will have to be amended. Lot 1 of Village at Glen Square subdivision is also an undeveloped parcel. However, this lot will be included in the subsequent replatting that you'll hear in just a second for case S12062. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Sean Odell to talk about the rezoning case.
Thanks, Dave. Mr. Chair, the petitioner requests to rezone Alaska Industrial Subdivision, Block 8, Lot 1, and Mountain View Development Subdivision, portion of fragment lot 14A, from I-1 and B3. The petitioner proposes rezone will make both parcels the same zoning, B3 SL, with a special limitation stating development of this site shall contain a minimum of 12 residential dwelling units. AMC 212090 states that a rezone may be approved if it conforms to the comprehensive plan and meets 4 conditions of approval. Section A conforms to the comprehensive plan. That standard has been met. The department finds that the proposed rezone from I-1 and B3 to B3 SL meets the intent of both the Anchorage Bowl Comprehensive Development Plan and the Anchorage 2020 Land Use Policy Map. This request expands the existing B3 SL zoning district to include an additional 1.94 acres. The petition site is located near a town center, which is intended to include a mix of retail and shopping, public facilities, and medium to high density residential uses. The proposed rezone brings the area into consistency with the comprehensive plan and supports the town center. There are several policies in the plan that directly relate to the residential development and are supported by this rezone. Policy 3 and Policy 10, which address development strategies for dwelling units and mixed-use development in town centers, as well as Policy 11, permitting mixed-density residential development, which is consistent with the character of Mountain View Drive, a mixed-use street. Section B, the rezone supports factors 1 through 4 with the proposed area for rezone complying to the environment, transportation, public services and facilities, and land use patterns. The proposed rezoning primarily cleans up a small remnant industrial lot in an area that has been identified for commercial use since the 1982 comprehensive plan. The expansion of the B3SL area from 3.7 to 5.6 acres creates opportunity to develop 7 units of housing meeting the SL requirements while maintaining a scale and density that is compatible with the neighborhood. The addition of 70 housing units further moves towards the goal of increasing housing units in the northeast sub-area of Anchorage. With that being said, the rezoning generally meets the standards for zoning map amendments found in AMC 21-20-90, and the rezone will allow for a more compatible zoning designation that is representative of the natural topography of the site and expands the usable land area for redevelopment. The department recommends approval of the request to rezone the petition site from I-1 and B3 to B3 SL with special limitations. Assuming the previous plating action that Dave spoke to and this rezone are approved, this will allow the final plating action to occur, which Mr. Whitfield will speak to you now.
Thank you, Mr. Odell. This plating action is a request to combine 3 lots into 1 lot. The 3 lots are villages at Glen Square Subdivision Lot 1, which would be created by case S12061-1, and then also 2 other lots, Alaska Industrial Subdivision, First Edition Block 8, Lot 2A-1, and Alaska Industrial Subdivision Block 8, Lot 1. The purpose of this plating action is to consolidate the 3 lots into a single lot so that the property can be redeveloped into a multi-family residential units. It's fairly straightforward, so with that being said, staff would like to recommend approval of case S12061, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff packet. Recommend approval of case 2014-047, subject to the conditions in the staff packet, and S12062, subject to the conditions in the staff packet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Spring?
Yes, I have questions for staff, and they're all lumped together, not necessarily pertaining to one particular case, but there's mention of a traffic impact analysis in the staff, at least one of the staff reports, and I wasn't sure if that's already been completed, or if that's to be required in the future, or what do you think the purpose of that is?
Actually, I believe the petitioner's representative can speak to the TIA and the status of that. We've had conversation with traffic, and I believe our understanding is that it is completed. However, and I believe the petitioner's representative can go into a little bit more detail about this. We only have at this point a draft copy of it, so we do not have the. Tony, do we have a final? No, we do not. We have a draft copy of the TIA. I would, however, like to make, if you don't mind, Mr. Spring, just make one correction to the staff report for S12062. I would like to remove from condition number 5, place the following notes on the plat. I would like to remove notes C and D that pertain to the TIA and replace that with a new condition 6 that states, and I quote, resolving TIA issues related to this site with the traffic department, end quote. And that would be on page 6 of the staff packet.
if I may, Mr. Chair, is there a similar condition on the rezone and the other subdivision? Or is it just for this subdivision action?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, this particular condition pertains only to case S12062-1, the plating action.
Okay. Well, we'll be asking the petitioner to maybe elaborate on what some of the conditions of the traffic impact analysis are expected to be. And if I have opportunity to ask another question. One of the comments from the Public Transportation Department was related to the need for a bus stop adjacent to this site, probably because of the 70 units that were proposed here. What accommodation in the subdivision is there for a bus stop, or is there a need to accommodate a bus stop within the subdivision, or is that going to happen on the public right-of-way?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, People Mover states they currently do not run along this portion of Mountain View Drive. With further commercial development along the Glen Square Mall and this development that's proposed, they are considering expanding Route 45, is the note that I have in here.
I saw that too, and my question is, what does that mean exactly? Does it mean that is there room on the street for a bus stop? Are they requesting the developer to provide bus stop shelter in conjunction with the development, or do they need some type of space within the property itself that's being developed? That's my question.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I do not believe there was a comment made pertaining to the plating actions that would have required a bus stop. I can certainly check, but I do not believe there was a requirement made by transportation requiring a bus stop be a condition to approval on the plating action.
So that was just information?
I believe so.
Okay. One more question?
Okay.
That'll be it. Okay. Also, there's one other condition that on that subdivision plat, the final one, that requires buffer landscaping between the property, the petition site, and the RS property to the northeast, northeast, I believe. And it appears that buffer landscaping is required between B3 and R3 residential under the current zoning, but the new zoning code, if I'm correct, and I wasn't as involved with as some of the members were, it looks like it may only require enhancement landscaping. So I'm wondering, should we apply the existing code or the new code
On
to
the
this?
page, it says old code.
It says old code. So do we have flexibility to?
I don't think so. I think it's old code.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, Mr. Ferguson is absolutely correct. This case was reviewed under the old code and therefore subject to all requirements of the old code, which would require buffer landscaping.
And is that done at the request of the petitioner? The petitioner has the option as to go old code, new code?
That's my
That is correct until January 1, 2015.
Do we have options to reverse that and go with a new code if we think it's more appropriate?
I don't believe so. I mean, we want. May I answer, or I'll leave that to staff if staff wants. This was discussed, and we decided to come forward with parallel codes for 1 year, but it was going to be one code or the other code. They didn't get to pick and choose, and we didn't get to pick and choose on it, and so it's identified as coming forward with the old code, so we follow the old code. I'm afraid if we tried to, even though how desirable it may be, I think it would lead to chaos, because then we wouldn't have any clear. I mean, do you get to choose one item and then I get to choose one item? And no, I think it's under the old code is what was submitted, what it was reviewed, and what we should approve it on.
If we wanted to override that, it would have to go through a variance then?
Staff, would you care to address
Through the
that?
chair, Mr. Spring, yes, it would need a zoning variance.
Even though it's not a dimensional requirement?
Yes, I believe actually it would be dimensional. It'd be dimensional in that they're not providing it all at all.
Well, well, I'll tell you what my problem was, is that in this case, I can understand why there's a buffer landscape between a commercial and a residential, but this is technically, I mean, basically a residential juxtaposed to another residential. And to me, it seems like buffer is a little more than necessary to buffer one residential, basically same density to another, and that I believe that visual enhancement would be more appropriate, and that's what it's called for under the new code anyway. So that's the only point I was trying to make. But if I can't make that motion, then I won't make that motion.
Thank you very much. Are you finished, Mr.
Yes.
Spring? Mr. Strike?
Yes, question for the staff. In reviewing the packet earlier, and I can't find it right off, is there any contamination on the current site or sites?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, the petitioner might be able to speak to that. It is supposedly a brownfield.
And my purpose for asking that is, I believe I read it someplace, so I don't know if it pertained to one of these new plats or one of these new properties that are being replatted here, or the previous lower section. But my concern is that going from a commercial piece of property, which I believe if it does have contamination, and moving it now into residential, does that change the remediation plan for the site?
Well, in the narrative, they state that the proposed area for rezone will facilitate a brownfield redevelopment. The petitioner has stated that funding for the site is secured and will ensure that the site is redeveloped in accordance with Alaska DEC requirements.
Okay.
Any further questions for staff? Okay. After the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the commission rules of procedures. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representative groups, community councils, PTAs, etc., 5 minutes, and individuals 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except commission recommendations to the Assembly which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Any individual may request findings from any commission decision within 7 days. Is the petitioner's representative here? Would you give your name and spell it, please? Turn the mic on. I think it's on the front. You have a green light. We got technical help coming. Last week it was the computer, this week the mic. Can he step over and use one of these possibly? I don't want to have everybody sitting here while we play.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, my name is Tony Hoffman, T-O-N-Y-H-O-F-F-M-A-N, and I work for the Boutte Company.
Mr. Hoffman, before you start, you understand that staff gave a combined presentation of all three of these?
I do.
Are you agreeable with that?
I am.
Very good.
We've
Go ahead,
discussed
please.
I'm here to represent the petitioner and present this case for them. There's also with me tonight representatives of the petitioner themselves, as well as representatives from the planners that developed the site plan. While this really kind of, when we started this whole process, it appears to be complicated. It really isn't. And it already sounds like the commission has got a pretty good handle on why we went through the steps we did. I'm going to do a brief overview just so we're all, it took me as a planner and a surveyor a while to figure out why we did what we did, but ultimately I've come around to understanding it and being behind it. The first case, 12061, will amend the current site plan for Burgas Square, as well as create the remnant parcel that will eventually be thrown into our final lot. Now, the reason we can't do all these platting actions together as just one plat, you'd think we could, but the problem is the fragment plat has got a condition of a site plan. It's tied to the site plan for Burgas Square. That's why we're into these multiple actions. From a platting standpoint, we'll be filing two plats, one right after the other. And then the rezone will affect the final zoning once that's done. The final configuration will be 5.6 acres and will accommodate the development site plan. The remaining fragment lot on Burgas Square is still available for future development as part of the Burgas Square site plan and the Burgas Square commercial platting process. The intent of the rezone is to make the entire parcel one consistent zoning. One of the reasons we decided to go with the SL rather than zone it all as B3 is money. The entire platting process, the petitioner is going to be well over $26,000. Rezoning the larger parcel and creating just B3 would have thrown another $8,000 or $9,000 into the mix. So this is why we're keeping the SL and keeping the limitation that's on it is the site must have at least 12 residential units. We're fine with that. The surrounding property is residential to the east with commercial development to the south and west, light commercial to the north side. The rezone is consistent, as staff said, with many of the goals, the outline for them, and we could point to quite a few more. I think it's a good fit for Mountain View and the area. I'd like to speak about the project itself a little bit before we dive down into the rabbit hole of the questions about the TIA and things. While we're not here really in this rezone process, while I understand the commission can ask a lot of questions, we don't really want to dive too far into the site planning issue. Because we went with old code, we're just here tonight to really talk about the rezone and affect that. The old code, new code question was a good question, though, and I'd be happy to talk about that more after I'm done with my presentation. But the project was initiated through a request for proposals to develop the site by the current landowner, which is a subsidiary of Alaska Housing Financing. And Cook Inlet Authority was selected in the process to build the project with their selected development team. The petitioners are here tonight. The Alaska Corporation of Affordable Housing, or AHFC subsidiary, will maintain ownership. CHA will maintain management of the project. It'll be a rental project, senior housing, affordable housing. CHA will maintain and manage the project, including rental, maintenance, and such things like that. While we were in the initial development of the site plan, the petitioner and the representatives did meet with the city many times. We hashed out a lot of the issues. This TIA issue that we'll talk about in a minute didn't come up at the time, and it's a new wrinkle that kind of came out, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But we have vetted this project through the city a few times, and the city is behind the project, and obviously they support it. On the site of 70 units, there'll be a community building and other amenities. There's If you look on just the basic site plan, we have real good, there's a pathway through the backside. We feel that the project development will enhance the pedestrian feel for the area because it's so close to the shops along Mountain View Drive, as well as down into the Burgos Square Center. So with senior housing, we expect little traffic being really generated through this, although a TIA has not been done for the project. This project will be developed with the standard current building permit process. So there'll be, when we say that, we'll proceed under the existing code for site layouts, for building setbacks, separations, everything from snow storage, snow removal, those kinds of things, all are being looked at under the existing code. And I'll talk about that if you want. The development's location makes it ideal for pedestrian access into the whole area, and we really feel it's a good fit for the community. And I think we've had quite a bit of community support. There's a letter from both Kimco and from the Special Olympics people, which are right across the road. Ultimately, we feel this project is a step forward in meeting the needs of affordable housing in Anchorage. And that's the goal that we're trying to get to tonight after we flesh out the details of this kind of unusual process we're working through. Again, I'd like to thank staff. We do concur with their revision to the condition for Plat 2. We think that's important, and if you have questions about that or any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Okay.
And I'll like to hold my remaining time.
You've got 3 minutes for your rebuttal at the end. Commissioner Dean.
Through the chair, I had a couple questions about the water and sewer issues that you have there. What are you guys going to do for water and sewer main?
There's public water and sewer in Mountain View Drive.
Okay, because it does say that you guys currently have a private system.
If there is, it'll be decommissioned. There may be a well on site that is going through a decommission process, but there's no private water on site.
Private sanitary sewer main located in Mountain View Development Subdivision Tract 1A.
Oh, that's in the fragment lot plat, in the fragment lot. So if that lot gets developed, there'll be a private sewer system for that lot.
And that's the lower.
That's the lower lot.
And it would be potentially developed with the Glen Square.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's why we're doing that separate. We're holding that as a separate, that could be developed under a couple different scenarios, but it will be developed in conformance with the site plan for Glen Square South.
So does Glen Square have its own private water and septic?
No, it's going to be hooked into the city water and sewer system somehow, but when they say private, that means it's not coming directly out of the public system in a single trunk.
Okay.
If that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then also the staff had recommendations in all 3 cases.
Right.
I was curious if you had any issues with any of the staff
Other than the revision to 5C and D and 12062-1, no.
So
We agree with all of them.
what would you like to see different?
As Mr. Whitfield suggested, we're happy with that revision to state that resolve TIA issues on the site with the traffic department, and that'll substitute for 5C and D.
Thank you.
And yeah, that simplifies it.
Okay.
Commissioner Spring.
Yeah, I'm just, I think that's probably a good change for the TIA, but I don't understand what potentially will be the result of the requirements of the TIA. Do you have an idea?
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, I'm not a traffic engineer. However, we did go quite a ways down the TIA hole today and tried to understand what drove the traffic department or traffic engineering to place these 2 notes on. Now, if you read the traffic comments, they say bring forward, specifically, they request that the staff bring forward the plat notes from the underlying plat. The underlying plat of the commercial frag lot plat. Those state exactly the way it was read. Now, we went and what happened happens with these frag plats, and I'm fairly familiar with the way we process them, once you have the original frag plat, 2006, Dow did the frag plat, there's been multiple changes in the property. And the TIA was not updated, modified, or amended, but the plat note carries forward. So the old TIA that we found that traffic has, and there may be others floating around, no one could tell us, has no bearing on this site because this completely changed. But we continue to carry the notes forward. So this site, though, the way the TIA process works, if we'll do what they call a pre-application meeting with traffic when you kick off a project and you're getting close to bringing in a site plan with 70 units. You do a pre-application with the traffic department, and they tell you whether a TIA is necessary. If you look at the way the original TIA was written, it spec'd out all the changes that have taken place on Mountain View Drive already. The light, the lanes got changed from 4 lanes to 3 in the interior lane. All the changes and all the upgrades were made. So we don't feel that any changes are required on Mountain View Drive. Our site will access off Mountain View Drive. It's a completely different process site. So what will happen is we'll have a pre-application meeting with traffic. They'll review the improvements, and they'll say no off-site improvements are required because Mountain View Drive is built to a pretty good standard. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chair, yeah, that clarifies a lot.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's not necessary for this subdivision, given that this last subdivision case takes 3 lots and combines them into 1. The only lot that would require TIA or a TIA to be amended would be the fragment lot that is part of Glen Square development.
I agree with you completely.
So I would say that is not a necessary requirement, although it may be necessary under the first subdivision because that divides the fragment lot into a subdivision lot and another fragment lot, which is part of the Glen Square. So that note should probably be carried over to in the first subdivision case,
Yep.
which involves the fragment lot.
I agree
And
completely.
I think I want to follow up that with that question and have the staff respond to that.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, yes, you're correct. However, with the timing of these 2 platting actions, you're essentially going to have one plat, the fragment, the portion that subdivides the fragment lot into a different fragment lot and a new subdivision lot, which is the plat that you're suggesting these notes go on. That will be recorded, and then immediately thereafter, the new plat that takes the subdivision lot created by that plat and combines it with 2 other lots to create one lot, which is where this development is going to happen. That'll be recorded right after. So if you were to I don't really see the need to put these notes on the fragment lot plat because you're going to immediately create or record a new plat that is going to create the one lot. So I would say yes, you're correct in that the note is applicable to that fragment lot. However, we are recording a new subdivision plat that will kind of negate that immediately. So,
Mr. Chair, I guess the problem I have is that the intent was that the new fragment lot, when it's developed, and there's no site plan on that currently,
Right.
needs to have amended TIA. And if that language is not included in the first subdivision, then that won't be required. That requirement would be removed.
You're correct there. That is correct.
So we need to add that.
So you
need
could
to add that condition to the first subdivision.
You could do that, correct.
And I would probably propose eliminating it from the second subdivision.
We will have that opportunity here shortly, I think. Do we have any other questions for the applicant at this time? Any other questions for the applicant? You can have a seat, sir. Public hearing on cases S12061-1, case 12062-1, and case 2014-047 is now open. If you wish to testify, please come up to the second mic up here to testify. Does anyone care to testify? Anyone at all? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Let the record show that no one decided to testify on this case. The applicant, you have about 3 minutes left to rebut the testimony you just heard.
No, but I would like to add something. Before we start talking about putting these plat notes on, there is a reason we objected to it on any plat, actually. And the reason is the TIA is so outdated that it's not relevant. And doing a new TIA is an expensive process. We didn't want to get bogged down with what should have been dealt with on the previous frag lot site plans. Honestly, I believe that if a development plan comes in for fragment lot 14A1, the new frag lot, a TIA will be required, and should be required. Now, we would be amenable to leaving a plat note saying any future development of fragment lot 14A1 will be in compliance with however these notes read. But you see, the issue I have is our sliver lot that we're creating out of there. We don't want that to get encumbered with the TIA, because that has nothing to do with the TIA. That's going to be attached to our lot along, you understand? So I just wanted that stated on the record. We had a lot of conversations about this. The TIA is grossly out of date, and how they recorded the plat for Bass Pro Shop, and they did do an amendment, but there's been previous ones to that didn't reflect our area. So it's something when we found the TIA and looked at it, it just doesn't, it's not applicable right now, especially for our area. So that's all I had.
All right. Thank you very much. For the commission, I'll remind you we will take case S12061-1 first, then case 2014-047 second, and then case S12062-1 third. Does anyone have any questions remaining for staff? Any questions at all? What is the wish of the body on S120? Mr. Walker.
So, through the chair, for the staff, Mr. Spring has brought up this issue of this traffic, the TIA, for frag lot 14A1. So I guess before I ask my question, what I'm trying to get to the heart of here is, do we need to make a motion to update the language for case 61-1 here as well as you suggested, or is that necessary? Is it necessary to have this language, or do you think it's necessary to have the language that we just talked about in the plat note for 14A1?
That question was for staff?
Yes.
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, I think that it is appropriate to strike it from S12062 and add it to 12061 if the commission finds that it is necessary to apply it only to 14A-1, to fragment lot 14A-1.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Walker?
Yeah, but, well, you said if we find it necessary. I guess what I'm asking is, what do you think is necessary?
Through the chair, I think it's reasonable to put it on S12061. That seems appropriate to me.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Spring?
Just follow up on that, just to continue the conversation. TIAs are really expensive. You probably know that. You're more than I do. It's enormously expensive, even amending them. And I think the Cook Inlet project with the 70 units wasn't intended to be part of the TIA, and it should be removed from that. Maybe if we add the wording that was suggested by staff to modify the last plat, which is resolve the need for a TIA, resolve TIA issues with traffic department, that'll give them flexibility to say, well, yeah, this isn't a big, the frag lot 14A1 site plan won't have any impact on the traffic over and above what's already there, and we aren't going to require a TIA, and leave it to the traffic department to resolve that.
Right.
I'm a little reluctant to tell myself to say it's not going to have any impact without seeing the site plan. But I agree with the petitioner in that most of the improvements have been done that were required under the first TIA, and that was the intersection improvements and light improvements, and it functions pretty good as far as I can tell now, except the ProBAS isn't in yet, so we don't know exactly. But I'm pretty confident that it will work. But if we just add that wording, it might help resolve it.
What is the wish of the body on S12061-1? Mr. Spring.
I'm not a platting expert. I was hoping the platting expert would make the motion, but in the matter of case S12062-1.
Whoa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I wrong?
Yes.
Oh, so that's 3-1. Sorry.
12061-1.
S12061-1. Subdividing a commercial tract frag lot into one frag lot and one subdivision lot. I move that we recommend approval of the subdivision proposal with the department recommendations, with the addition of one additional plat note to be placed in A to D, which will read, resolve traffic impact analysis issues with traffic department as it pertains to frag lot 14A-1.
Mr. Walker, you seconded that motion. Do you care to speak to it?
Yes. Should we include the language from the staff in the findings here, just so that we're on the record? So you gave us a quote, and I think it was something like resolving the TI issues related to this site on the site or something like that. Could you restate that for the record?
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, the language is quoted resolving TIA issues related to this site with the traffic department. And I would also like to just quickly get clarification from Commissioner Spring. I believe you proposed to make that a plat note, or was that a condition?
I'm sorry, that was a plat note.
A plat note, so you
Yes.
want that to go on the, okay.
Yes. And that would be plat note under plat note A2D
On page 7.
on page 7. Okay.
Dave, was that have you spoken? You're in the queue. Okay, Brandon.
My apologies.
So I'm sorry I kind of interrupted my findings, but just so we get it seems like this action has community council support, or they didn't really make any comments, so their support is implied. There was no significant public opposition, appears to meet the standards of Title 21, and the staff seems to have it pretty well in hand, and this appears to be in the public interest. So,
Anyone care to speak before we vote? Can we use our machines? Please use our machines.
Point of order, real quick. I just need to clarify again the proposed plat note is, in my opinion, should be a condition of approval as opposed to a plat note. It doesn't, from a platting perspective, it really should not be noted on the plat. I think it should be a condition of approval to be resolved with the traffic department. If the traffic department adopts language that they believe should be required on the plat, then I believe that's appropriate. But in terms of the language stated by staff, that was intended to be a condition of approval as opposed to an actual plat note. So,
I'm sorry.
I hope that the commission understands that this is the language that I'm proposing is really not suitable as a plat note.
Mr. Spring, do you have a comment on that?
Yes, that was my mistake. I see that, yes, the original recommendation was to replace 2 plat notes regarding TIA and replace it with a condition. So I see that's correct.
So your motion now is that the language in question is now a recommendation and not a plat note. Is that correct?
It is a condition of approval. So it would be A4 under department recommendations.
Okay. Mr. Walker, you seconded that motion. Is that your understanding at this time also?
Yes, that it would be a condition and not a plat note.
Okay. Let's use our machines, please. Okay, that motion is carried. So anyone care to add any findings on that one that have not been mentioned yet? Mr. Whitefield? Whitfield, you're back in the queue. Mr. Strike, are you in the queue?
I was in the queue.
Okay.
As far as comments for findings, too.
Okay,
that,
go ahead.
This project is consistent with the community needs and the comprehensive plan, and I find that the project also is a major step forward in providing affordable housing in the city, which is needed.
Any other comments? We will next take up case 2014-047. Mr. Spring.
I think I am prepared to make a motion on this one. In the matter of case number 2014-047, request to rezone approximately 2 acres from I-1 and B3 to B3SL, I move to recommend approval of the rezoning, subject to the one condition of staff recommended on page 8 related to the development containing a minimum of 12 residential dwelling units.
I need a second on that motion, please. I have a second. Mr. Strike, or Mr. Spring, would you care to speak to your motion?
Sure. I believe that this rezoning meets the standards contained in 21-20.90, that the rezoning will facilitate a brownfield redevelopment and improve the environment, that the rezoning is consistent with the Anchorage Comprehensive Plan and will provide a good balance between retail and housing within a designated town center area, and that it also helps to meet the need for affordable housing within Anchorage.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Do you care to speak to your second?
This parcel, combining all 3 and changing the zoning from a combination of I-1 and B3 to B3SL over the entire lot will make development much more smooth.
Any other comments before we use our machines? Okay, can we vote? Please vote. That motion is passed. Do we have anyone speaking to findings? Mr. Spring?
I believe I already made a list of findings.
Ms. Dean? Any other one else speaking to findings? Okay. Now we'll go to case S12062-1. Mr. Spring, you're in again.
In the matter of case S-12062-1, re-subdividing 3 lots into 1 lot, I move to recommend approval of the subdivision, subject to staff recommendations 1 through 5, with the exception or the removal of conditions to be placed on the plat note 5C and 5D.
Mr. Strike, you have seconded that. Would you care to speak to your?
Yes, I have. No, and I want to appreciate the efforts that have gone into laying this out. It was fairly clear and fairly concise. I think we were able to do our homework and follow this through. This project's, again, consistent with community needs and the comprehensive plan, and that you're bringing affordable housing to an area that is in need and to the Anchorage area, and it's appreciated. Thank you.
Anyone else care to make any comment before we vote? We are voting on case S-12062-1. Please use your machines. That motion also carries. Anyone care to speak to findings? Okay, that completes the combined Cook Inlet housing issues. Mr. Robinson, if you're listening, you can come back, please. We will now take up case 2014-029, Municipality of Anchorage Severe Alcohol Dependent Housing and Transitional Use Facility. May we have a staff report on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2010, the Anchorage Assembly passed an ordinance that added a new use to code to Title 21 called Severe Alcohol Dependent Housing. The purpose of this ordinance was to enable a development that is now known as Carlick Manor, and it did require a conditional use for Carlick Manor, and Carlick Manor did go through that process and is in its, I believe, 2nd year of operations. In 2012, a lawsuit was filed against the municipality alleging that I'm going to call it the SADH, Severe Alcohol Dependent Housing, SADH, alleging that the SADH ordinance was discriminatory. Fast forward to now, the state law claims in that lawsuit have been stayed while the Muni develops amendments to Title 21. The municipality released a draft ordinance in January of this year, and that ordinance did 3 things. It deleted the severe alcohol dependent housing use, it deleted the transitional living facility use, and it proposed a new use that was called supportive housing. This was routed to agencies and community councils and released to the public for comment. After further research and after receiving comments, the administration was not comfortable moving the January draft forward. More time is needed to develop an appropriate replacement to the severe alcohol dependent housing use that finds the proper balance between land use concerns and fair housing laws. However, due to the time frame provided by the stay, the removal of the severe alcohol dependent housing provisions from code must go forward. So the revised draft that is before you in your packets does that and only that. It does not address transitional living facilities, and it does not propose any sort of new use. Considering, however, that the revised draft was not routed to all the community councils, staff recommends that the commission open the public hearing this evening, take testimony for whoever does wish to testify, and then continues the public hearing to its May 5th meeting to enable staff to route the revised draft to community councils and thus allow them to come forward and comment. Thank you. Oh, and I have Municipal Attorney Dennis Wheeler here to assist in answering your questions. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for staff? Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You indicated that, clearly this is just part of the action moving forward. This is removing something that's been identified as problematic to the municipality. Could you update us on the process of coming back and updating the code to deal with some of these other issues in a proactive way?
Through the chair, Mr. Robinson, thank you for that question. Staff, both staff from the Community Development Department and the Legal Department, are continuing to research the issues, find examples from other communities, and work on the development of an appropriate ordinance to bring forward. We do hope to be able to do this within a couple of months, but we don't have a definitive time frame at this point.
One follow-up, Mr. Chair. So there's no way that these two decisions get linked up, that a proposed ordinance occur at the same time as this action if it's moved to next month? You're not ready?
We're not going to be ready by next month.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? If I understood staff's recommendation correctly, it is we would open the public hearing, hold the public hearing, and then suspend the public hearing until the next meeting, and then reopen the public hearing again. Is that the recommendation?
Mr. Chair, the recommendation would be to continue the public hearing at the next meeting.
Okay. And if someone chose to speak tonight, would they be able to speak at the next one or not?
Normally, when public hearings are continued, people are allowed to testify just once. Okay. However, I believe the Commission has the discretion to choose procedures that or allowances that they desire.
Mr. Wheeler, would you care to address in general, or would you just wait for questions later on?
Mr. Chairman, attorneys hate to pass up a chance to talk, but actually I really don't have too much to add. Erica covered it just right. We do want to get this resolved as quickly as we can, and if we can set aside what's currently in litigation until we can come back with something new and improved, that would be much appreciated. So thank you for your time, and I will be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Okay. This issue for us tonight is just to remove language that is difficult for us in the litigation. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Spring?
So I guess the question is, we eliminate the current statutes under Title 21 regarding this type of facility, and at some future date we reinstituted that language or new language that meets the federal requirement for fair housing. What happens in between those times? Is there a potential for, I doubt if there is, but a floodgate, opening floodgates for these type of facilities? Would they be allowed outright then, by right, in any zoning district? Or what would be the status of these facilities?
Through the chair, Commissioner, I don't expect a flood of applications. Frankly, I think if there were going to be a flood, we would have seen it under the ordinance we're now trying to repeal. If an application comes in, we'll apply whichever code they select, new or old. To the extent that they don't fit into a definition of what we, in terms of what we're to have in terms of rehabilitative housing or any other categories, then my recollection is the code provides that I think it's the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals gets to decide whether it fits under a current definition or doesn't fit at all.
Just to follow up, what's your opinion regarding which zoning districts these would be allowed in without the current statute?
Through the chair, Commissioner Spring, I'm sorry. As I was trying to say earlier, it would depend on the nature of the request. What is it they're trying to do, and how close does that match what we currently have on the books? If it doesn't match, it may be determined that it's prohibited in certain zoning districts, but without seeing an actual application, it would be speculation on my part to try to guess.
So we don't know if it would be prohibited pretty much all around, or it be allowed in any particular place.
That's correct.
We have no idea at this point.
Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, my question of staff is, so right now, this particular amendment could change between now and May or June when we hear it again. Is that correct? Do I understand?
Through the chair, Ms. Dean, the ordinance that was provided in your packet, the draft ordinance, will be going forward to the Assembly. At a later date, but hopefully within the next couple of months, we will bring a new ordinance to the Commission for a recommendation that will presumably, again, we're still doing research and gathering information, but presumably propose a new use, amend an existing use, but try to address issues regarding things like severe alcohol-dependent housing in a way that both strikes the, like I said, strikes the appropriate balance between land use issues and fair housing laws.
When is this going to the Assembly? Is it after we're done with it, or is it going to go before then?
It will, the action, well, again, it depends on what you do tonight. But the intent is that action at the Assembly would not be scheduled before the Commission makes a recommendation.
Any other questions? Any other questions at all? Okay, we will now open case 2014-029 for public hearing. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules and Procedures. Petitioners, which we do not have, will have 10 minutes. Representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, etc. will have 5 minutes. Individuals will have 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. And an individual may have appeal rights relating to the action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Any individuals may request findings from any Commission decision within 7 days. Okay, will you please state your name for the record?
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Michelle Wiley. It's MICHELEWILEY. Tonight I'm speaking on behalf of the Turnagain Community Council, hereinafter referred to as TCC. I must admit that I'm somewhat in a quandary as to what I can testify to this evening, considering the fact that they've brought up the new version that they're going to present, hopefully in the next couple of months. So I've drafted my testimony just on the SADH ordinance. Since the staff has only spoken about the need to repeal the SADH ordinance, I will try to limit my comments to that topic. In doing so, I hope to preserve TCC's right to testify on the supportive housing measure at a future hearing. However, the two topics are so closely intertwined that it's almost impossible to speak to one without mentioning the other, so please excuse me if I slip up. So here we go. First, TCC has gone on record as opposing the repeal of SADH. I believe that resolution is in your package. If not, I do have copies for you here. Do you need copies, anyone?
I think we have it.
Okay. Because the 2-year-old lawsuit against the municipality, TCC understands the need to repeal the SADH ordinance in a timely fashion. However, TCC also believes in due process under law. Title 2.40.060 of the Municipal Code outlines the municipal responsibilities to community councils. Reading in part from the code, except where an action must be taken on an emergency basis, the mayor shall be responsible for giving to community councils an opportunity to participate in the formulation of and to review and comment upon all land use, social, and economic proposals which, in the opinion of the mayor, the assembly, or the agency head involved, will have a significant impact on all or a substantial portion of district residents. In the matter before you, this did not take place. TCC knows for a fact that the Spenard Community Council did not receive the SADH repeal notice that was sent out by Erica McConnell on April 1st at 4:25 p.m. Ms. McConnell confirmed this during a telephone conversation we had. During the conversation, she said that she sent the notice to just interested parties. Because tonight's agenda notes that the issue affects all community councils, I hereby request that the hearing be postponed until all community councils are notified. Further, TCC would ask that the Planning Division move forward and present to you supportive housing ordinance that they drafted in January of this year. This presentation should include TCC's recommendations as outlined in their resolution, which has been provided to you in the large package that I submitted to you as an individual on April 8th. TCC understands the need to repeal the SAD ordinance. However, proposed supportive housing ordinance leaves a gaping hole in Titles 21 and Title 23, which are intended to protect the public health, safety, and welfare by providing minimum standards of development. While Ms. McConnell may state that the repeal of the SADH is an emergent nature, the Planning Division has had ample opportunity to present the matter to you as a body. TCC knows of 2 instances where this matter was to come before you, both on March 3rd and again on April 7th, but both presentations were postponed. The reasons for the postponements are unknown to TCC. In closing, I will reiterate TCC's desires that this meeting be postponed until all community councils are notified and given the opportunity to submit comments on the repeal of SADH. That the Planning Division present you with the supportive housing ordinance for your consideration. This ordinance, even in its draft stage, will help fill the gap left by the repeal of SADH. Lastly, TCC would appreciate the ability to testify before you regarding supportive housing ordinance at future meetings. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on this important matter.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for her? Your April 8th letter was a very well-written letter, and I appreciate that very much.
You're very welcome.
I have a question for you tonight. I understand clearly what you said, but I also understand the legal obligations, or I believe I understand the legal obligations that the city is under. How do we answer that dilemma?
What does the stay currently say? When is the drop dead date on the repeal?
This is my experience, and I'm not letting the attorney answer. I'm going to give you my experience. In a legal matter, often the other side won't agree to a stay. You'll make the request, and they just remain silent. It's a negotiating ploy that happens frequently. So I believe that may be the situation the city is underneath here.
And we, as Turnican Community Council, we understand that. That's why we've asked for the implementation of the supportive housing measure.
I think that would be correct when the new ordinance comes forward. I see these as separate steps. And I understand your displeasure at some of the handling, but I mean, I'm just trying to get this thing through to help the legal department get the city in the strongest position we can. If it were left to us, the people in this room, we could probably draft an ordinance fairly quickly that we'd all like, but it wouldn't work. So on that one. But does anyone else have any further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please choose to testify. Come forward, please.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Brian Shelton Kelly, BRIANSHELTON-KELLEY. I am the board secretary for the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. The coalition wanted to speak tonight to voice our full support and urge the passage of Assembly Ordinance 2014-209 029 to remove the use known as severe alcohol-dependent housing from Title 21. The coalition represents a network of nonprofits, community members, businesses who provide support to prevent homelessness and connect the homeless to safe, secure, and affordable housing. The coalition is opposed to any local zoning or land use law that discriminates against housing projects for individuals or families with disabilities. We assert that supportive housing should be by right in zoning districts that allow multifamily housing, and that supportive housing should be treated equally to all other multifamily housing, regardless of the needs or incomes of the residents. As a recipient of federal funding, the MOA, the Municipality of Anchorage, has an obligation to affirmatively further fair housing, and the Fair Housing Act requires that local government decisions must not have discriminatory intent or impact on persons with disabilities. It is unlawful for the MOA to make decisions based on unfounded assumptions and speculations that are discriminatory in nature to people who experience a disability and try to codify discrimination through zoning and land use regulations. Repealing the severe alcohol-dependent housing ordinance is a positive move, but does not take care of the broader issue. The Municipality of Anchorage's 2007 analysis of impediments to fair housing choice identifies zoning as one of 6 primary impediments to fair housing. The report states that lacking a specific definition of supportive housing, Title 21 groups supportive housing with a use known as habilitative care. This greatly impacts the ability to site housing that includes supportive services that are designed to meet basic needs, help develop life skills, and help individuals access social services that increase a household's ability to retain housing and end the cycle of homelessness. The coalition urges that the MOA continue the process of developing new code provisions regarding supportive housing, and we pledge to work with the municipality during this process to develop fair and transparent public policy and land use regulations that are designed to meet the needs of those in our community who experience a disability and result in reducing barriers to housing development. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Any questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. Does anyone else care to testify? Please come forward.
Hello, my name is Anna Brawley, ANNABRAWLEY, and I'm here actually on behalf of the Spenard Community Council. I'm the secretary. So our president, Bob Auth, had submitted written comments prior to the meeting that I believe are in your packet. I just wanted to reiterate, given the staff recommendation to move forward as quickly as possible and consider at your May 5th meeting, which would be your next regular commission meeting. The Spenard meeting is not until Wednesday, May 7th, 2 days after that. And I think we've demonstrated in the past that we are interested in the community process. We have not taken a position for or against this, but have not, the members of the council don't feel they've had sufficient time to discuss it and to make a recommendation to the municipality. So I ask that you consider postponing this until May 12th, recognizing the need to move forward, but that there is a time frame which would be after the community council meeting and before your next commission meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone, any questions? Thank you very much. Oops.
Actually, I have a question.
We have a question for you.
So,
Mr. Walker.
Ms. Wiley brought up this issue of notification, and I just wanted to clarify, was the Spenard Community Council not notified?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
We actually learned about it during our April 2nd meeting because another member came and spoke.
Okay, thank you.
Or, I'm sorry, not a member of the council, but a member of the public.
I see. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else care to testify? Please come forward.
Hello, my name is Gloria Manning. I'm a resident of the west side of Anchorage, and I thank you for this opportunity. I sent already comments to this commission regarding the January draft, and things keep changing about these changes to this title, portion of the title. So tonight, all what I can say, it is that I understand that this recommendation is front of you because of this legal issue between the city and whatever is doing it. And given that, if you need to pass anything, you need to remember, please, that I see Title 21 as a balance of need in the community for the whole community, with disabilities or not. The fact that we need housing for people with disabilities or any kind of mental or addiction problem is real. It's there and we recognize it. There's no opposition to that. But the programs need to be done in a way that, and so the title should speak to, proper regulation and orders of the agencies that manage these operations. Therefore, should you pass and decide to go ahead and approve whatever the city is asking you, staff is asking you to do, I think that you should block, as Mr. Springer has mentioned before, completely the issue on any conditional use permit that may occur between now and whenever the city is going to put together changes to the title. It would be unfair, it would be a loophole into the old system. I want to state here that I'm not here because I have problems. Sometimes too often the public has been marked with the label of not in my backyard. Absolutely not. It's not on my, what I believe in, what I really am speaking for. I want to have an opportunity, and unfortunately, it seems that here the public opportunity has been bypassed. And with that, I would like to say that things keep changing. I'd like to be able to testify the next time if there's any change to this issue.
Do we have any questions? Ms. Manny, do you spell your last name M-A-N-N-I?
M-A-N-N-I. Yes, that's correct.
And you wrote a letter on March 26th to this
yes,
board?
Yes, but was regarding the other, the January thing, yeah.
Okay.
But the concept remains very much the same, you know.
I understand your frustration on the thing that keeps changing. I understand that, but it's the nature of what we do on an issue like this.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to come to a legal decision.
Yes, yes.
And you've heard other sides speak. I mean, this
yes.
is not a slam dunk in one way or the other way.
Right.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Again, I recommend that you suspend also, you know, if you can put a condition to suspend the issuance of the conditional use until we have the final one. Thanks again.
We'll have the opportunity to ask some questions to staff in a minute.
Thank you so much.
Get the testimony through. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Jim Davis. I'm a fair housing advocate. I'm a lawyer with the Northern Justice Project. I'm going to be brief this evening and just talk about fair housing law and what I think this commission should consider. Big picture-wise, if you were considering imposing restrictions on African Americans, gays, Italians, or other minority groups, you wouldn't be having a conversation about input from community councils about how they felt about Catholics or gays. You wouldn't be doing that because you'd know better that getting so-called accountability with community councils about how they feel about Jews is illegal. When it comes to disabled people, it seems we're having some kind of conversation about what community councils feel about disabled people in their neighborhoods. The Fair Housing Act says that that's illegal. The SAD ordinance was illegal the minute it was passed. I've only been before this commission one time before, and that was when you were discussing conditions to put on Carlick Manor. And what I suggested to the commission at that point in time is that if conditions were imposed on Carlick Manor, they'd violate the Fair Housing Act and the city would get sued for that. And hundreds of thousands of dollars later, the city would pay for violating the Fair Housing Act. 2 years later, that's where we're at. And we're discussing now what other kind of restrictions we should impose on supportive housing in the name of accountability to taxpayer community councils. I'd ask you all to just step back for a minute and put yourself back in the 60s when these sorts of conversations happened with African Americans integrating into the community. Some planning commissions went along with that notion that we needed to be accountable to the local community and impose restrictions on certain types of development, especially the types that black people would live in. Other cities said we weren't going to do that. And the cities that said we weren't going to do that, we're following the law, and I think we're doing the right thing as a moral matter. So I would simply suggest that what's that saying? Let's not worsen a mistake by doubling it. The ordinance itself was illegal when it was passed. I'm not sure all of you or which of you were on the commission when it was passed, or the conditions that were posed in the Carlick matter, but let's not make the same mistake twice. If you can impose restrictions on the development of housing for large Catholic Italian families, then you can do it for disabled people, and you can do it for supportive housing. If you can't impose those restrictions on one minority group, you can't impose those restrictions on another minority group. Supportive housing developers shouldn't have to come here, get the community meetings about what kind of restrictions and costs are going to be imposed on them, and if they don't jump through those hoops, they can't do a development any more than a black family should have to do that. If there's actual data, empirical evidence suggesting that Italian families have huge parties and cause traffic problems, then you can impose restrictions on those Italian Catholic families, maybe because of those huge parties and the traffic problems. But if you don't have empirical data like that, you don't. And in the context of supportive housing, the city doesn't. So I would ask on behalf of the community at large and not local neighborhoods that you all do the right thing, withdraw the SADN ordinance, allow supportive housing to be developed without the so-called CUP process, where neighborhood councils can impose whatever restrictions you'd like to impose on supportive housing developers, and let the people in our community with disabilities have housing. Thank you.
Mr. Robinson, then
Mr. Chairman,
Walker.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just for a moment.
Go ahead, Mr. Weir.
I just want to point out for the record that the speaker is the plaintiff's counsel in the litigation. So with that in mind, keep that in mind while asking questions, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, Mr. Davis, but if in the nature of looking at certain housing programs that have an element of staffing or programs that is in fact feels a little bit different than simple independent housing. In other words, there are offices, there are facilities, there may be maybe a numbers thing that makes it somewhat different. Is there guidance that you would provide under fair housing that would say some of those considerations from a land use and zoning standpoint are appropriate for our commission to consider, and in fact are done in other communities around the country, while still being while not being in conflict with the Fair Housing Act?
If I understand your question correctly, Commissioner Robinson, I think there's law out there that answers that precise question. I think the answer is if you have evidence that this supportive housing development, because of office people or staff people, is going to create more of an impact on a neighborhood, you can impose restrictions on it. Just like as if Widener were going to develop another project and have on-site maintenance people or on-site manager, which it does. If you're going to impose those same sorts of restrictions on a Widener development as compared to supportive housing development, and not simply because it's supportive housing, that's legitimate. But you can't legally target a project and say it's going to have more of a burden because it's supportive housing if, when you look at actually, you said if it feels, it's not a feeling thing. You have to actually look at the evidence. Is it really going to impose increased traffic? How is it going to impose increased traffic as compared to a private development with, say, on-site management or on-site maintenance? Did that answer your question, sir?
It did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
Trying to choose my words wisely here. So I have a unique perspective on this particular issue because my company recently moved its offices into the office building at the corner of 13th and Gamble. So it makes me acutely aware of some of the problems that can occur in this population of people that are severely alcohol dependent. And they do require more support. And I think that, and this is where I'm trying to pick my words correctly, but I think that their mere dependence on alcohol clearly creates issues with traffic and perhaps the way that their judgment in crossing the street or jaywalking, or so those kinds of things definitely impact the neighborhood. So do you think that there should be absolutely no restrictions on that behavior whatsoever? I mean, I guess that's where I'm a little bit confused.
Well, Commissioner Walker, I don't think you mean that behavior. I think you mean to say if, for example, supportive housing for individuals with the alcohol disability are going to lead to X, and you know it's going to lead to X, can you address it? And the answer is yes. But what you can't do, for example, is to impose, let me just give you one example, parking restrictions, however you want to say it, parking requirements on, say, supportive housing that you don't impose on a similar private development without any logic behind it. Unless, then the logic I mean is to say the individuals that are living in this supportive housing are going to drive more than residents in a private development. You have to, if you're going to impose restrictions, there has to be a basis for it. If you're going to allow, let me just answer it a different way. If you're going to allow community councils to come in and impose restrictions on a private apartment developer's development in that particular neighborhood that's otherwise allowed under the zoning, you don't do that. That kind of development is as of right. You don't do that because you have no evidence to suggest that private development is going to have some special impact on the neighborhood. But when it comes to supportive housing, it becomes this conditional use process where all sorts of restrictions can be imposed, and this whole notion of so-called accountability exists when you don't do that with other people. So the answer to your question is yes, if you really have proof of that. Otherwise, it's more of a pretext to make this sort of development more difficult, which I think anybody in this room or anybody in the room that's at the next meeting is going to, any developer, anybody in the line of this work is going to say that's why there's so little supportive housing, because nobody knows what hoop is going to have to be jumped through to get any kind of supportive housing developed in the city. And that, as a reasonable matter, makes it difficult to get any funding for any sort of supportive housing, because nobody knows what this commission or this assembly is going to impose on a development to get anything done, which is not what you all do with regard to private developers.
I've been trying to bring up my copy of the real estate law here, but maybe you can answer this better as a fair housing advocate. There are protected classes and there are unprotected classes, if I'm
correct
stating that correctly. Is the population of severely alcohol dependent individuals, are they a protected class?
Yes, sir. And that is something I brought up to the commission when, before any of the litigation started, I said federal law recognizes alcoholism as a confirmed disability. That I've seen the materials in front of you where members of the neighborhood say, we don't think alcoholism is a disease. That's okay. People are entitled to their opinions, but their opinions aren't right. Their opinions aren't in accord with any cases in the country, because cases in the country as well as the medical community recognize that alcoholism is a disease, just like certain kinds of mental illnesses are a disease. You don't have a choice to be a schizophrenic. You don't have a choice whether you're going to be an alcoholic. Sure, you can be a schizophrenic and be medicated and have your medical condition under control. And sure, some alcoholics are more functioning than others, but it's not a matter of choice. And it's considered by all courts that I'm aware of as a protected class, as a sort of disability.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Spring?
Sounds like eventually we're going to get really deep into the subject, especially if there's a new ordinance that comes up. But I guess just to clarify something in my mind beforehand, what you said was you can't treat this group differently from any other group. But yet in this city we have conditional use permits that apply to a wide variety of supportive housing. For instance, prisoners in a halfway house have requirements to meet a conditional use permit. We have children in supportive housing who are maybe emotionally disturbed, or other types of non-handicapped persons that have to comply with our conditional use standards. What would be the distinction? I mean, if you have to treat groups equally, that say in this case groups that require supportive housing, could you apply a conditional use permit on severely alcoholic dependent?
Well, Commissioner Spring, that's a good question, and I guess answer your question by referring to the 2007 study that HUD conducted on the MOA zoning ordinances. And I can provide that to the commission if you don't have it already. But HUD found that this patchwork that you're talking about, where certain supportive housing had to jump through these hoops, other kinds of supportive housing had to jump through these hoops, the entire patchwork itself might be illegal because it subjected all supportive housing developers to this great unknown. What class do we fall in? What if we're moved to this class? We have to jump through these different hoops. And so nobody knows exactly. Some few do, but oftentimes the developer doesn't know what classification they're going to be forced into, whether they're going to be subject to this CUP process or a different CUP process. So it's not just me standing up here saying this is a concern. I mean, folks smarter than me with more experience in this area, HUD itself, wrote a report to y'all back in 2007 saying this kind of requirement for certain kinds of supportive housing and this for others, and nobody knowing what was allowed and what wasn't allowed might well violate the Fair Housing Act because it prevented the meaningful development of any supportive housing.
Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony, sir. Does anybody else choose to testify? Anyone else at all?
Good evening. My name is Kenneth Scollin. I'm with Rural Cap. I'm actually the manager of Carlick Manor, and probably going to be the manager of the next project that you're going to see come across your desk too, is the Safe Harbor project that we're working on in Merrill Field. You know, some of the things that we did here 2 years ago when we started Carlick Manor was quite an unknown. I mean, sat here and we jumped through different hoops. We talked about putting an elevator in a building that an elevator wasn't required. We talked about putting a heated sidewalk between buildings where heated sidewalks weren't required. We talked about doing landscaping and fencing of a different type that wasn't required for other developers. And basically it cost us $600,000 more to develop that project than it would have if we were just another contractor building a multifamily housing project. One of the things that I will say is that, you know, we heard testimony from community councils, we heard testimony from other people that thought that Carlick Manor was going to be a huge problem, that there was going to be a lot of police calls, that there was going to be a lot of issues with the neighbors. Some neighbors threatened to sell their house if this happened. None of those things happened. We haven't had a written complaint in 18 months. Over the 2.5 years that we've been open, we've had 2 written complaints total. The first year of operation, we had 90 police calls to the facility, which sounds like a lot of police calls. However, when this population is out on the street, to answer your question, when they're out on the street, they do act differently than when they're in housing. When this population was out on the street, they interacted with other agencies, police department, fire department, and the sleep off over 100 times a year. So this population could have resulted in 4,600 police calls over the year. Before we took over the Red Roof Inn, the last year Red Roof Inn was in operation, they had 400 and some odd calls. We had 90, and we reduced that to 70 the following year, and hopefully reduced it again. Now, the first year when we had 90 calls, according to the police department, they only responded to 27 because some of them were not to the police department. Some were emergency calls because we do work with a population that is very disabled. Their health is compromised. So a lot of the things that we thought would happen wouldn't happen. You know, I would like to enter into my next development project with an assurity that I knew what to expect. You know, the last time we sat here, somebody said, well, I think you need an elevator. Well, we want to develop this project. I guess we'll put an elevator. Somebody else says, it needs to be big enough to fit a gurney. Where does that come from? But we had to agree to put a handicap elevator, even though the floors that these elevators were going to were not handicap accessible. But that was something that we had to do to get the project passed. And I really don't think that's fair. I think if we came together and did something that fit something that we could foresee, that we could put in our budget. It's very difficult to figure out a budget to start a project like this when there's a lot of unknowns. So that's all I had to say.
Any questions? Ms. Dean and Mr. Walker.
Through the chair, I was on that commission at that time, and I was one of 2 votes that voted no on Carlick Manor. The other person that voted no along with me was one of the managers for NeighborWorks, which is also a community organization too. We felt that the amount of money being spent for such a small group of people was very sad, and that the money we felt should be spent in other ways. There was a whole slew of reasons why we voted no. I could go on and on and on. I'd have to read back through my notes, but there was a lot of reasons why we voted no. The elevator issue that you bring up, we looked at all the times these guys are going to the hospital. How are you going to get them in and out of those rooms left and right to go to the hospital? It was a huge deal. That's why we asked for the elevator large enough for a gurney, because of the emergency personnel having to get these people in and out. Not only are they possibly injured, but they're have all kinds of other issues associated with that potential injury that makes it so much more difficult for the emergency personnel to get those people out and safely to the hospital. So I'm going to defend that requirement. I understand you didn't have to do it. Is that correct?
No, we put an elevator in.
Yes,
we
but
put
it
a
was
handicap
not,
accessible elevator in.
But it was not a gurney-sized
We
elevator.
had to come back and say that we could fit a stand-up gurney before it was passed.
Right, and we didn't ask for a stand-up gurney. We asked for a regular rolling gurney.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so they did relax that. I do have to say I still really empathize with the neighbors. I think it's a very dangerous location, which was another reason why we voted against Carlick Manor. It is the busiest intersection in Anchorage to put a facility for people to live in where they are going to be potentially drunk, falling in the street in front of garbage trucks or whatever.
We're getting a little bit off the topic
But that,
here.
if I can answer that, I mean, that is the type of thing that we put with that we listened to 2 years ago, and it hasn't happened. No one has been hit by a car. We've reduced the pickups. It does cost $60,000 to $70,000 to keep an inebriated on the street. It costs $22,000 to keep it on housing. So it's not an issue. I mean, the money is not an issue because we save money. We've reduced the pickups by almost 90% by the Community Service Patrol pickups just by the fact that people are in housing. They reduced their drinking by 25 to 30% just because they're in housing. So those are non-issues. It really didn't happen. I understand where you're coming from. The neighborhood was the same way. And now I'm actually a member of the executive board of the community council at FOPI. You know, so I've been elected to their board.
I have to say that there are many reasons why the community councils would argue with you, and I'm not alone.
Yeah, with that's getting a little bit outside of where we are. Mr. Walker?
So you're the expert, obviously, in this field. I mean, you're the boots on the ground for this first facility that was put in town. And if we look at, like, for example, Ms. Wiley's comments, and she was very eloquent in stating her concerns about maybe opening a door to having one of these facilities, you know, or taking down some of the barriers and having one spontaneously grow up in your backyard. And I could certainly identify with that. You mentioned that you had some neighbors nearby that threatened to sell their homes. Can you elaborate on what your relationship is with those neighbors now? And
It's actually, our relationship with the neighbors is actually pretty good. We interact with, there's still some neighbors that they don't like us and they never will. I mean, I could see that coming. I mentioned that to the community council 2.5 years ago. I said, I don't expect a lot of support, but I hope in 2 years we'll be friends. And that's happened. So the neighbor who said that was Allstate across the street. And we speak with Allstate all the time now. Matter of fact, they had some vandalism on their property, and they came over and reviewed our cameras to see what happened. And it wasn't one of our population that caused the incident. You know, so we do get along with the neighbors. We work with the neighbors. We designed our project with the neighbors in mind. So we did listen to a lot of the input. We listened to a lot of the concerns, and we did some things with our design to accommodate that.
So as one of the experts on this particular issue and the boots on the ground in this current facility, do you agree that there should be absolutely no restrictions whatsoever put on a facility like this? I mean, you're obviously intend to develop another one. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, you know, we're developing another one, and as a responsible agency that's responsible for outcome measures and results, and we get vetted and we get audited by Alaska Housing, by HUD, by the Mental Health Trust, so we're accountable. We have to be accountable to all these agencies to do a proper job. And if we didn't do those things, our grants would be shut down. You know, so there is a lot of accountability there. So it wouldn't be that there's no accountability or no, but some of the zoning should be, it should be housing by right. We should be able to know what hurdles we have to jump through to be able to develop something. You know, we had to change our budget 2 or 3 times to accommodate that project, just because we really wanted to get it off the ground and we didn't have time to argue about anything. We wanted it to really happen, and so we did whatever we could to make it happen. And we jumped through a lot of hoops.
Thank you.
Mr. Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for running a good organization. I think that, you know, what you speak to, the unknowns, are things that we all get frustrated with when we're in the development world, no matter what type of development we do. I would say, you know, you made a point, and it's very evident by your testimony here and testimony of your colleagues, that your organization is one that we can all be proud of. Should we at least be considerate of the fact that there may be other organizations that may not have all the learnings that you have learned, that may try to delve into the same type of assisted housing, that may not have quite the means or access to resources that even you all do, and that we shouldn't look for at least some clear standards that we can stand up to fair housing and know that we're not in violation of fair housing, but know that we're being protective, or just doing the basic things that perhaps you already do as an organization but somebody else may not do, so that we can make sure we're doing the right thing for the ultimate residents and the neighbors?
Sure. You know, certainly anything can happen, and I think that's one thing that we probably strive for, is to get together and sit down and have that conversation, to come up with a plan that does meet both, that meets, you know, that helps to meet your objectives, but certainly meets our objectives too. So I think that I'm open for that, yes.
Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
All right, thank you.
My name is Merle Akers, spelled M-E-R-L-E. Last name is A-K-E-R-S. I'm a 70-odd year resident of this community. I live in the Turnagain-Spenard area. What I'm asking you to, in this Title 21, it's so confusing to me, I don't know what you're going to do. But let me tell you what the problem was, which I haven't heard anybody tell you yet tonight. The problem with the Longhouse started with no notification to the neighborhood, to the adjoining properties, to the community councils, that this project, that a hotel, which they had approved at some point, approved the plans, had a chance to comment on the plans way back when, was going to all of a sudden change from being a hotel to another kind of a facility. And then it was, in fact, almost complete, because the funding, they'd already been granted or promised funding from the state legislature to complete this project. Now, immediately, The neighbors are up in arms. How can you so we now learn, if we get a little further in, that all of a sudden, because this has a designation, somebody has zoned it and given it this special designation, a group of people can come in, buy a building, change it from a use that's been there all the time to another use, which in the view of the public is going to degrade the neighborhood. It's not going to improve the neighborhood. I'm asking you, before you pass any more rules, regulations, or whatever on this, to make sure that whatever goes forward from here forth, when you change the designation, that the neighborhood, that the surrounding property owners get notified, and that just because this particular facility falls in the boundaries of the Spenard Community Council, and right across the street is this Turning Community Council. Turning Community Council doesn't get notified and doesn't get a chance to participate. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Thank you very much for your testimony, sir.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Burke, B-U-R-K-E. I'm with the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, and we're partners on all of these housing projects, in fact. And I think Kenny did speak to the added costs, and one thing that he missed was the fact that the conditional use process itself costs between $60,000 and $80,000. And so that's just running the process of going through conditional use. And I think if you think about the kind of neighborhoods we want and the things we're trying to accomplish as a community, we have a shelter that's running at 1.5 times its occupancy right now. We have people that are falling out of the housing continuum because the rental market is locked up by a certain number of owners who screen out anyone, and it's their market, so they don't need to rent to people who don't have good credit records and who are not able to compete with kids coming back from college or the rest of us, for that matter. And so we have this situation where we have a whole group of people who aren't able to be housed. And then when we reference the behaviors of people who aren't able to be housed and they're coping with it, we cite that as the reason why we don't want to house them, even when we've proven 2 times now, first with Carlick Manor in Anchorage, now we have another project in Fairbanks, we have Juneau planning this type of project, that this is effective. It turns people into productive citizens. I mean, Ken didn't even mention the number of people who are sober at Carlick Manor. We have one woman who's completed her CNA and she's going to work now. That's the outcomes we want. Those are the outcomes we expect from these projects. And he's absolutely correct. The state, the funders, and people who are providing that public money are absolutely standing at their door looking for accountability. And I think the nature of the conversation, and particularly even some of you commissioners, you might even consider recusing yourself from future votes because you're still arguing about the people. You're not arguing about the land use. You're arguing about someone stumbling in the street and getting drunk. Well, I'd like to know how many college dorms you limited because of the fact they're near a busy street and college people are going to run around and fall out drunk in the street. That's going to happen. How many senior projects did you require a gurney-sized elevator on? I'd like to see that. How many Widener properties came through and you said, you got to monitor the park? I don't see it. You're judging based on the people. You're not judging on land use. And that's what you need to keep in mind. And we're going to continue fighting for these projects and whatever it takes. We're going to continue to try to house those people that Anchorage is not seeing and they're letting remain unhoused. That's what we're doing here. Thank you.
We have some questions. We have at least one question in the queue. Mr. Spring?
Yeah, I don't know what the difference between the Carlick Manor and the Longhouse is. The previous testifier mentioned Longhouse, and I don't know what the difference is.
They're both supported housing for protected classes of people.
So they serve the same class. They serve the same clientele and have the same objectives, and
their use is the same. Supported housing.
Okay, So severe alcohol-dependent persons.
No, it
No.
wouldn't be.
It's not?
People with mental illness is targeted.
Oh, it's
for the
Longhouse?
Mhm.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anyone else care to testify? You faked me out with the head fake there. I thought you were heading for the door, and then you turned around.
Quick stretching in the back. Good evening. Thank you for entertaining. My name is John Sperbeck, and I work for Anchorage Community Mental Health Services, JOHNSPERBECK. And I am actually doing a number of different things for that agency, but one of the things that I do has been designated as the project manager for the aforementioned development of the potential opening of the Longhouse project. And that is affordable housing potentially for people with mental health issues. And I'll be very brief and pointed. ACMHS, Anchorage Community Mental Health Services, is in support of the repeal of the SAD ordinance and really teasing out the issues. That was, I think we would recognize it as a bad ordinance when it came out. I sat through all of the planning and zoning meetings a couple of years back and listened to that. And I would urge, not doing policies and ordinances predicated on specific projects. That's really bad policy, and I think that's a result of that. When you develop a specific ordinance that way, it ran into the things that people had talked about here tonight. And it did fly in the face of fair housing and a lot of things that were common sense about it being in violation of fair housing. And that was discussed at the time. But again, separating the issues, address the SAD ordinance. We're in support of pulling that and then looking at the other things separately later. So, thank you.
Do we have any questions? Thank you very much for your testimony, sir.
Yep, thanks.
Anyone else care to testify? Anyone else at all? I'm going to try to go forward here and see if we can get this. The chair would welcome a motion to continue the public hearing at a date to be set after some discussion. This will be just to continue, to close this evening's portion and continue it at a date to be set shortly in the future. Mr. Robinson?
I move that we continue the public hearing to a later date.
Thank you very much. I have a second with Ms. Barker. Any discussion? Any objection to that motion, Mr. Spring?
Are we going to follow up with a date?
Yeah, we're going to follow up. I'm trying to do this in a couple steps to try to do this I can. Ms. Barker?
I have a question for staff. Could you reiterate the time frame of the stay?
Through the chair, I actually don't recall the date of the stay off the top of my head. Mr. Davis might know off the top of his head. I have counsel, an assistant municipal attorney who's handling the case. I do know that what we were running into was a time frame where we had an agreement on when we would get an ordinance to you, and I believe that time is run or is on the verge of running if it hasn't already.
Can we vote on the continuing first, then come back and revisit on setting a date? Do we have any objection to continuing the hearing? Seeing and hearing none. Okay, question for staff. What does our agenda look like on May 5 and what does our agenda look like on May 12?
Mr. Chair, your May 5th agenda is relatively normal. Your May 12th agenda is pretty heavy.
So you would, and I'm trying to be be responsive to as much of the testimony as we could, as we heard tonight, and we heard a plea from Spenard to go for May 12. But I would say we've got, it looks like May 5th would probably be our better date. The chair would welcome a motion to continue the hearing to May 5. Hey, Mr. Robinson, thank you. Do we have a second? Okay. Commissioner, Ms. Barker, are you in the queue?
I'll withdraw that for now.
Okay. Mr. Spring?
I'll be supporting the motion, although I am, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, I think I would be willing to vote on recommending approval of the ordinance at this time. I'm not sure what testimony we're going to get that is going to change my mind. But the staff has recommended, based on the fact that community councils haven't had enough time to comment, and I think with an ordinance, that any ordinance that you propose, it is the right of the public to comment on it, even though it's obvious that based on the Fair Housing Act that this really needs to be done. So I'll be supporting it.
I agree with you 100%, but I'm trying to, be responsive to the testimony we heard on all the sides. We have very competing demands on us right now, and so on that one. We have a motion and a second to continue the public hearing to May 5. Any objection? Any objection? Seeing and hearing none, the hearing on case 2014-029 is continued into May 5. Ms. Barker?
Mr. Chair, I have a request of staff. I would like the commission to be provided with a copy of the 2007 HUD study that Mr. Davis referred to.
Through the chair, Ms. Barker, we will get that for you.
Thank you.
Do we have any reports or anything else? I think, Ms. Dean?
I had something I wanted to bring up separate, and I was hoping that staff could stay for a couple more minutes. And I'd like to bring up an issue from last week related to Academy Drive. Is this the appropriate time to bring it up?
Go ahead.
Okay, here's my question of staff. The notices go to property owners on that particular road project, correct?
Through the chair, Ms. Dean, design study reports for road projects are not required to have public hearings.
So they
and
don't get...
thus the commission would have to decide they wanted to hold a public hearing, which postpones it for, at least 21 days. But when they come to you on the consent agenda, or on the regular agenda, I should say, they do not get noticed.
Okay, because there's a lot of property owners that would be affected by that road, commercial and residential in that area. I was just curious how that worked, because I was surprised we didn't have more people show up. But you're right, it wasn't a public hearing, so yeah. Okay, that was my only question. Sorry.
The chair would welcome a motion of adjournment. All in favor? Any objection to adjournment?
No objection.
We stand adjourned. Thank you very much.